I'm Tony G. I work for a company called Pentest Partners, and effectively we're ethical hackers. So we do the usual sort of pen testing, you know, the vulnerability stuff that you do, as I'm sure you do, you know, looking at your code reviews, all of that sort of general stuff. But in our spare time, we like to look at that stuff, at IoT Kit. We like to have a look at stuff which we're going to be buying into our houses either now or in the future. And we've looked at lots and lots of different things. You know, we've looked at Samsung smart fridges, we've looked at the Outlander, which I'm going to talk about in a second, we've looked at Kayla, which again I'll talk about, smart TVs, loads and loads of other different devices. Our latest, greatest thing is this thermostat, which we've got some ransomware on, which is quite cool. And so I'll hopefully run through some of those so you can kind of have a look at some of those issues. But I thought I'd start by talking about how bad it gets. And that is really with this kettle. I don't know if anyone's bought one of these kettles. Has anyone got one? I really hope not. You probably don't anymore because it's so rubbish it actually falls apart so quickly. But you know, a kettle is an essential thing in our house, right? You know, everyone has a kettle in their house. And this thing's got a little mobile app that you can boil it from your smartphone, right? That sounds really cool. Saves you about 60 seconds in your life. Utterly pointless, utterly pointless. And you still have to fill it with water as well. So, you know, it's got a fundamental flaw to it. And not only that, it cost you about 120 quid when it first came out. It's like, really? It's a kettle, 120 pounds for a kettle I can boil from my smartphone? Well, the problem is that when you start to look at these devices, what a lot of manufacturers don't realize is that they provide the end user the source code effectively for the application that runs whatever it is. So that mobile application you provide, it's super easy to decompile that to understand how the application works. So the easiest way to look at it actually is with Android. iOS is a little bit more complicated, still very much do the same thing, but Android is super, super easy. So you literally just grab the APK from the Android device. You can use that with with ADB, Android Debug Bridge. Just pull that off there, or in fact, you can just download the APK from certain websites if you're feeling lazy. And then it's just really, really simple to just decompile it using dex to jar, which then gives you a Java file. Effectively, you just open that up in either JD GUI or JDEX, and you can just view the code that the application uses to make whatever the device works. And I think that's a bit of a game changer, really, because most manufacturers, you know, when you build something yourself, you don't tend to think that you provide that source code. You provide compiled code. But nowadays, if you're providing mobile applications, you're providing your source code. And so we had a look at the application, and we found that actually it was quite possible to hack it from outside of the house. You know, all you need to do is send a deauth packet to the kettle. What happens is the kettle will deauthenticate from the home network, connect to you. You can then log on to the kettle, which is very, very weird, and I'm going to actually show you how you do it. So essentially, you just log into the kettle. Let me just find my, there it is. Oh, it always does that. Let's try that again. Won't be a sec. Drag that over so you can see it a bit better. So essentially, once you've deauthenticated the kettle, effectively you just connect to it, and you just use telnet. And I can find my nice. So you just telnet to the kettle. It's 192.168.1.105 because I've got this on my internal network. Oh, for goodness sake. Terrible. Never do a typo on live stage. Let's try again. That's better. Right, telnet to the kettle. Now, what we found from looking at the code is there is a password to authenticate to the kettle. But the problem is the developers are so rubbish, they didn't actually call the code. So rather than the password setting a random 6-number passcode, it actually just sets it at 6 zeros. So then you just log into the kettle, just like that. Let's try again. There we go, right. And then to get the actual SSID, well, you kind of know the SSID because you're within range of it. So you just do AT plus key for AT plus SSID for the SSID. And that's the SSID of my home Wi-Fi network. And then you do AT plus key for the key. And then you get the password for the home Wi-Fi network in plain text. and all you've done is stand outside the house and deauthenticate the kettle. And it's nuts, it's absolutely nuts. And then you kind of think, well, okay, well, let's be honest. We contacted the vendor and we said, what are you going to do about it? And their response was pretty similar to most IoT vendors. Well, it requires specialist knowledge, and actually you're going to be hard-pressed to find someone with one of these kettles. Now, I don't think that's an indication of how many they've sold. I think it's more, think from a practical point of view, where does a kettle live? It kind of lives in someone's kitchen, right? And so it's not like it advertises itself on the street, does it? Well, these ones kind of do. There's a few in London. So what happens is the kettle shipped with an access point called iKettle. And then effectively all you need to do is you just look on wiggle.net, which is a war driving database of SSIDs, for the SSID iKettle, and you'll find a number of them in their unconfigured state. Once they get configured, that iKettle SSID does disappear. So, it doesn't stay around for a long time, but we know that people, don't always get around to setting things up, and not only that, the people who are doing this war driving are doing it constantly. So the reality is that you do get a few that you can find. So, what do you want to do about it? Well, the thing, once we've attacked the device, and once we've got your SSID and password, then we can start to attack your internal network, and we can start to do things like man-in-the-middle traffic. If we can get to the router itself, we can change your DNS, for example, so that we can point it to us. Potentially, we can do things like intercepting certificates or modifying certificates or providing fake certificates, so we can start to man-in-the-middle SSL traffic as well, which then it gets kind of a bit more scary because then you're kind of breaking into secure traffic. But if you are a manufacturer of one of these devices, the thing to be aware of is, working out who is liable for those losses. And we're seeing this quite a lot actually now with connected cars. People are starting to think, well, who's liable for the actual loss against, if someone dies, for example, who's responsible for that? We're also seeing it with the Mirai botnet, where the manufacturers of the CCTV cameras that are causing that are now kind of finding that they're ending up needing to say, look, we're liable for the losses as a result of this. But, the bottom line, make sure your apps are securely coded. You can't say it simply enough. And the way to do that is obviously to test it. But OWASP have got some great guidance on how you can make your applications nice and secure. But the biggest thing, in my opinion, is having the capability to remotely upgrade it. That kettle does not have any remote capability to upgrade it, which is a massive issue because they can't fix the problem. There was a similar sort of issue with the Fitbit and the Ring doorbell. Both of those devices have the remote update capability. They're now fixed. That kettle's not. And I think it just illustrates how rubbish that developer is. But IoT does get a little bit more creepy. Certainly when we think about my friend Kayla here. My friend Kayla is an interactive child's doll. She's quite old now, but I like to still talk about her because she does set the scene quite well. So she's basically a Bluetooth headset. So she connects up to a little tablet, just like that. I've got a pink tablet, as you would expect, with a child's doll. So it connects up to the tablet, and effectively it's a Bluetooth headset. It's got no pairing security, so anybody can connect to her when she's not connected to anybody else, so don't start trying to connect it up to my friend Kayla. And essentially, she's designed to be child-friendly, so she shouldn't be able to swear. She shouldn't be able to do things that wouldn't be appropriate for your child. But obviously, we're hackers. So we wanted to find out whether or not you could make her swear and do things that would be inappropriate. And so we started to have a look at how she was built. And so we had a look at her application. So she's got an application. There's no pairing on the Bluetooth, so effectively anybody could connect to her. So that's one way of attacking her. She has also got voice recognition, so effectively your child can talk to her. So your child will ask her questions, and then the doll will give you an answer back to that. And then, obviously, she's got a database of bad words she can't say. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? Rather than me actually say this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to get Kayla to do it. I'm hoping that microphone's on just down on the pedestal here. That was my cue to hopefully you turned it on. Good. Right. So I'm going to get her to read a little story. Hopefully it should come out.
The story to you. Let me begin. So how did I get hacked? Well, it works in a number of ways.
She's very creepy
Firstly,
as well.
because I have no pairing for the Bluetooth connection so anyone can connect to me. I also have a database of questions a child can ask me, and I will provide a canned answer. I am not allowed to swear, though, and so I have a database of bad words. Both can be modified. I also can look up things from Wikipedia. This can be intercepted and modified. However, the easiest way is to modify the story I'm reading now, and then I can say anything I like, including swear words. What the hell? I was told I was doing the whole presentation.
Yeah, Kayla, unfortunately you're not going to, but it's very nice of you to try. So, she can do lots and lots of things. Obviously, you have to modify the application and then hack that back onto the device. But, that's relatively simple to do with Android devices. But obviously, like all good security researchers, we of course contacted the vendor, and they said that they would update the application to fix the issue. So the vendor decided to update the application, and the way they did it is they encrypted the bad word database and the question database with SQL cipher, not realizing at all that when you encrypt something in a mobile application, you have to supply the key in the mobile application as well. So it took 5 minutes, and we just found the key for the SQL cipher, and then we could start all over again. So it's absolutely ridiculous. It just shows that the manufacturer just does not get it. They just don't understand it. Interestingly, actually, Wikipedia introduced SSL on their API, and she stopped kind of talking to Wikipedia, which was a bit frustrating because she only uses HTTP. So, it's another issue. The problem with this device is that, she's got complete Bluetooth promiscuity. I can't even say that word, but, I'm with you. And so anybody can connect to us. So whilst, you fix the app, no problems at all, but anybody can connect their device up to Kayla. So effectively, stand outside the house with your phone, connect up to Kayla, and start saying inappropriate things to your child. It's as simple as that. It's absolutely nuts. And there is no fix for it. The only fix is recalling the device, which obviously is not ideal. There are other listening devices which are a bit stupid. I saw one on one of the first slides that you did, Mark, which is Amazon Echo. The Amazon Echo is a brilliant device. Really, really good. Really, really well designed as well. And actually, it's pretty secure. The problem is, people don't kind of realize that you connect stuff to it. And one of the things you can connect to it is the August door lock. It's a Bluetooth smart lock. But because Kayla's so clever, she can hear you from across a crowded room. And so what you can do is you can actually say to Kayla from across a crowded room, or perhaps from outside the window, sorry, not Kayla, Alexa. Alexa, will you unlock the door? And what does Alexa do? Well, she unlocks the door. So, whilst the two things, I don't think a Bluetooth door lock is a very sensible option in my opinion, but, the Alexa's very good, but, whilst the two things potentially could be fine independently, you put them together and you've got yourself a bit of a problem. Does anyone have a BMW with connected drive? You do. So the interesting thing about connected drive is that you can stand outside the house and say, unlock the BMW to it, because they connected that to Alexa as well. So effectively, because Alexa's so clever, you just stand outside the house and say, unlock my car, and because you've paired it with your connected drive application, you'll unlock the car, you can just get in the car, and then you can code your own YuKey and effectively drive off in the car. It's absolutely nuts. It's just like no one thought that adding these two things together would cause such a problem. We also had a look at cars and hacking cars, and we had a look at the Mitsubishi Outlander. Now, the reason we looked at cars is because there's a massive attack surface when you start to think about hacking cars. Because you've got probably a Wi-Fi access point on there, whether that's for consumers to connect to, or in the case of the Outlander, for its own communications. But then you've also got other things on there. Things like the infotainment system, which has got some kind of an API which connects up to their servers, for example, the manufacturer's servers. And you've got all of these other sensors and all of these other systems on the car, which make it really easy to start to attack them because of that huge attack surface. And if we look at some of the previous attacks, we've got things like the Charlie Miller hack and Chris Valasek, or whatever his name is. And those guys, they hacked the Jeep Cherokee and effectively stopped it in the middle of the highway. And that was simply because there was poor connection, or poor separation between the infotainment system, which was accessible from the internet, and the CAN system, the system which managed the whole, the car itself and says what the car should do. And there's also another bit of research done by Scott Helm and Troy Hunt, and those guys just looked at the Nissan Leaf. I don't know if anyone's got a Nissan Leaf. You may have found that a while ago, some of the functionality stopped working on it. Well, that's as a result of those guys, because they found a vulnerability in the infotainment system. And Nissan decided the best thing they could do is just turn it off, ultimately. So the web service doesn't work as it used to, which I think is quite cool. It's quite impressive, actually. Of course, that's such a huge impact. Tesla. Now, Tesla are brilliant at security. They've got a really, really, really secure platform, because effectively they're a software company that happens to build hardware as well. And so they've got that kind of software mentality about designing it securely. And but they still had hacks. Weak trust relationships. They've got a very, very separated system, very well segregated. But unfortunately, there was some trust relationship issues, and as a result, they were able to be hacked. As I say, we looked at the Outlander. Now, we wanted to have a look at the Mitsubishi Outlander primarily because we were interested to see the way they did it. I mean, what happened ultimately is one of my colleagues was picking up his children from school, and he noticed a strange wireless access point. And he thought, well, that's a little bit odd. I wonder what that is. And found out that it was one of his friends. It was his friend's car. They had an Outlander. So we thought, that's sort of interesting. So we went and bought one ourselves to see what it was like. And what we found, actually, is the Outlander does connected car capabilities in a bonkers way, in a completely different way to anyone else. Most connected cars have an API which connects up to, through GSM on the actual car to the API server on the internet. What Mitsubishi decided to do is to have its own wireless access point that you connect your phone to then make the changes or whatever it is you need to do to it. One of which, it's hilarious, in the mobile app, you can actually find the car using this system. It just goes to show how stupid they were when they designed it, that the Wi-Fi access point has got a range of about 10 meters. So if you're completely blind, you might not be able to find your car, but it's within 10 meters of you. The chances are you'll be able to find your car. So it's absolutely nuts. So yeah, you can also use the client as well for doing over-the-air updates to the phone. Whoa, I wouldn't necessarily suggest you do that, primarily because we found that the Wi-Fi access point is rubbish. It just falls over constantly. So can you imagine doing a firmware update on a car when the Wi-Fi access point falls over and suddenly you're like, oh, that's not going to work. But not only that, you need to be within range of the Wi-Fi access point at all times with your phone for this update to apply. It's absolutely nuts the way they chose to do it. Anyway, obviously having its own Wi-Fi access point, it has an SSID and it's got a passcode. Now the SSID can't be changed. Sorry, the SSID can be changed, but the passcode cannot be changed, which is crazy. It's like, why is that? That's a really strange way of doing it. And when we have a look at the particular key format, the SSID is formatted remote and then two numbers and then 4 letters. The passcode is just simply 4 letters and 6 numbers. And that is just not good enough these days. It's really easy to crack a simple passcode like that. Our graphics cracking rig, we reckon about 2.5 days to do that. Actually, probably could refine that a little bit with a bit of tweaking. When we look at Amazon Cloud Compute, you're looking at about £1,000 and you can do it almost instantly, which is absolutely nuts when you think the car is, what, £40,000 worth of car? So you can crack the passcode for it and then have a look at some of the other things you can do. Once you crack the passcode, you can then start to understand the communication. So the red bit on the screen there is the stuff that your app sends to the car, and the blue is the stuff which comes back from the car. Loads of gumph in there effectively, but the key bit is anything that starts F6 is a message from your phone to the car. So once you can understand that, you can start to understand and make changes to the car, like this one. You can turn the lights on and off by sending that code, and hopefully it should play. Just like that. But that's fine. You know, turning the lights on is quite cool, but really not that big of a risk. What's more of a risk is turning the alarm off. So I've got my colleague Ken to do this little bit for me. So
it's not going off. Even worse, I'm now in the car.
So obviously we kind of staged it a little bit by having the window open, because it would be quite expensive to smash a window just for a video. But it doesn't unlock the car, but of course you can smash the window and unlock the car from the inside. But you know, it just goes to show that just sending that simple code to the car, you can effectively gain access to the car. And once you've gained access to the car, you can do things like coding a new key using the ODB2 port. And then you can, of course, then drive off in the car. So it's not you don't need a physical key in this car. It's a keyless car. So you just need to have the right coded fob effectively in the car, and then you can drive off in it. It's absolutely nuts. But the thing is, though, that's stealing the car. Often, the motivation is not necessarily to steal the car. Potentially, you can make other ways of making money from the car. You ever seen these on your computer? Hopefully, you've never had, but are you familiar with ransomware on your computer? So this is CryptoLocker. Ransomware on your computer encrypts all of your data, forces you to pay money to decrypt it, right? Pretty simple. Would you be prepared to pay money if it's got photos of your children on there and you've not got any other backups, you've got no way of getting those pictures back, you know, you've got 10 years of your child's life, you're never going to get those pictures again, would you be prepared to pay the money? Possibly so. What happens if it's your business computer and you've got critical business information that you're never going to be able to get back unless you pay the money? Would you be prepared to pay? Well, people do. We know that people do. But what happens if it's really cold outside and suddenly your children wake up and they say, "We're really cold, Dad. Can you turn the heating on?" And you go to your thermostat to turn the heating on and you're faced with that. What would you do? Would you be prepared to pay the money? Potentially so. So we thought we'd have a look and explain how, you know, Mr. Robot, if you're aware of the TV show, is absolutely not fictional. What we did is we had a look at a ransomware on a thermostat. I've got it just over here. I'll show you later if you want. And what we wanted to know is, could we kind of take control of that thermostat? And could we then do things like locking the end user out and effectively holding their heating to ransom? So we had a look on Amazon, managed to find this device, a Venstar device. This is a smart thermostat that a lot of people in America have got, less so in the UK. It's mostly Americans who have got this. I think there's about 1 million of them installed in America. And we had a look on the FCC site. So the FCC site is the American site. Anyone who wants, as you guys I'm sure will be aware, anyone who makes any kind of radio communications enabled device has to have it FCC approved. And so you can have a look on the FCC and you can find lots of very, very sensitive information, like the internal view of the device. And based on that, and based on their reports, we were able to identify that potentially it was ARM-based and it was Linux-based as well. And so being Linux-based, the chances are that we can hack it quite easily. So once we got one, we had a look at the hardware itself. And what we were doing, we were looking for things like JTAG ports or SPI or UART ports to be able to connect into the device and start to examine the firmware on the device. What we found, though, was that it didn't have any JTAG ports, which was a bit frustrating. But it did have an SD port on there, which was a bit strange. And there was also some serial out thing, but that didn't really seem to do a lot. But the important bit was the SD card. And so why is the SD card there? Well, the SD card there was because end users wanted the capability to be able to update things like the picture on their smart thermostat. And it's also quite hard on the screen to make very complicated heating routines and cooling routines. So it's much easier to use the application. So the application is just an Adobe Air application you download to your system. It's a Windows-only thing, unfortunately, so if you've got a Mac, sorry about that. I don't quite know why it's Windows-only. It's a bit weird, but anyway, being an Adobe Air app. Anyway, so you download the application, but importantly, from the Air app, what you're able to do is you're also able to update the firmware. But the way they do that is they package the firmware within the application. So it's really, really, really simple to use something like binwalk and extract the firmware out of the device. So you extract the firmware from the application, and once you can extract the firmware, you can then start to build it into a file system, and then we've got the file system. Once we've got the file system, we can then start to examine how the application works. And what we found is that the application works all from one single, effectively, JavaScript page. And do you remember, I'm sure you're probably aware, do you remember SQL injection for websites? You know, we're all aware of SQL injection, I hope. Well, you can kind of do the same thing with this. You can do command injection because effectively they didn't validate the user input. And remember, end users are able to change the screens on their devices, so you can change the wallpaper. Well, unfortunately, they didn't validate the input that's put into that. So effectively, you can append your own commands to the end of the input for that, and then you can get command injection. And that's exactly what we did. And the reason that that happened is just simply because the developer did not realize that attackers would be able to examine the firmware. They really didn't realize that anyone would be examining their firmware because they included the SSL shit status in there, which is a bit nuts. And also the son of a bitch mode, which I have no idea what that is. Apparently, what the son of a bitch mode is, that there's 3 different modes. I can't remember the other 2, but it's how fast the screen wipes over when you've got different pictures in there. And son of a bitch mode is the fastest mode. So, yeah, it's absolutely nuts. But you know, they just didn't realize that people would be looking at their code. But once you've got control of the device, you can then do things like you can just about see it, I guess. You know, sticking a screensaver on there. And so you can lock out the screen, you can stick a PIN code on there, so they have to enter a PIN in order to be able to decode, get access to the system again. And you can then also start to mess about with their heating and their cooling routines. And so you could do perhaps turning it on and off very, very quickly and start to burn out the switches on their boilers, for example. Or perhaps turning it really, really cold when it's really, really cold, or really, really hot when it's really, really hot. And just generally frustrate them to the point that, you know, they would pay money. I think you can also make a buzzer on it, so it just has this really annoying buzzer that constantly beeps at you, which would be absolutely frustrating. And it all happened because they trusted the file. That's all it was. There was just complete trust in that file name. They allowed us to do command injection. So, you know, that's kind of on your thermostat, which, you know, it would be frustrating. And of course you could go and buy a new thermostat, or you could pay the ransom. Depends on the time of day, I guess. You know, a thermostat's about £200. Ransom would probably be about the same, roughly, although it says 1 Bitcoin, so that's probably about 700 now. But, you know, you could just go and buy a new device, and that would get rid of the issue. But what happens if, you know, it's pretty cold outside, you're desperate to get to work, so you get into your car, you're really, really late, or your children are desperate to get to school, which is probably quite unusual, but anyway, you never know. And then you go to start your car, and you're met with that. What would you do? Would you pay the money? Would you get into another person's car? Possibly. Who knows? But if you haven't got any other car, what would your option be? Would you pay that money? Well, at the moment, we kind of think that ransomware on cars is very much theoretical. But, you know, it's not a leap of faith to think that, you know, as we get more connected vehicles in our life, that actually, you know, being able to take over those and create things like ransomware on cars is very much a real possibility. But at the moment, in terms of weaponizing IoT, we're seeing the Mirai botnet. So I don't know if you know much about this botnet. This is effectively created by CCTV cameras, and the Dahua IP CCTV camera is the initial one. Then also started using DVRs, and now they predominantly use DVRs. Ultimately, there's a number of different credentials, default credentials. It's all it boils down to. Devices have got default credentials on the system that anyone's able to use, and because they're internet connected, anyone can effectively connect in with those default credentials. And actually what we're seeing now, if you buy one of these cameras or one of these DVRs, is within minutes your device is hacked. Within minutes. It's absolutely insane. So as I say, you know, Mirai has now moved on to kind of DVRs and SSH on port 22. They used to use Telnet, which still does kind of a little bit, but most of it's now on SSH. And it created a huge botnet of computers. And That's Mirai from a few weeks back, and all of the little orange dots are effectively a hacked CCTV camera or DVR. And you can see there's loads of them, and all over the world. And as a result, they've got this botnet of computers which can create a 1 terabit denial of service. And quite frankly, you're not going to stop that. There is not much that will stop that. And we saw that when, the DNS service for Twitter and a number of other large websites got knocked offline. And we saw it also with Brian Krebs, his website, which was protected by Prolexic. Unfortunately, Prolexic then kicked him off their network because they were doing it for free. But even those guys, it cost them a huge amount of money in bandwidth as a result of that denial of service attack. But, denial of service attack, what's the worst thing that's going to happen with that? Well, your website's going to be knocked offline. That's not really the end of the world, I don't think. It's frustrating, absolutely, and business is going to be lost, but it's not really the end of the world. What's much more interesting is when we look at what IoT could do in terms of really scary stuff. So, as I said, there's around about 1 million of these thermostats in the US, in the UK, and there's 1 million of the hives primarily and the Nest in the UK. Many, many more in the US, especially when you add those to all of those other thermostats. So imagine if we could take control of all of those devices. All of them have got port 80 open, HTTP, but if we could control those devices, could we use them to switch on the power at exactly the same time, the exact same millisecond? So switch on maximum cooling and use maximum amounts of power from the national grid, but do it at the exact same millisecond when the national grid is at its highest or peak usage? Well, it seems quite feasible that could happen. And the impact from that is ultimately it's going to overload the national grid, and ultimately we're going to cause blackouts, quite severe blackouts. So how do you find out when the national grid is at its maximum usage? Well, it's pretty simple. You just go to that website. And you can see in real time. And there's ones for all around the world. This is obviously the UK one, but there's ones all around the world where you can find out what the national grid usage is, and then you can start to tailor your attacks to find out when the peaks are. And so you can really cause a very, very serious impact. So, IoT, the attack surface on IoT is absolutely enormous. And the problem is there's just so much for you to think about. So there's things like your mobile apps, your APIs, your radio frequencies, Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, for example. You've got your firmware as well, and you've got all of these other systems that you're building into it that you've got to be aware of. And so what I'd suggest is, there's a lot of opportunity there for you to make money, ultimately, and for consumer interaction. But you need to kind of think about making sure that your devices have some capability to be remotely updated, have some capability to be secured appropriately, because ultimately it can cause a very large impact to your brand if you start finding that, if consumers start finding that these devices are either leaking their PII or their card data, for example. And just to kind of finish off, if you're looking for some guidance on how to improve security on these devices, OWASP is great, and there's IoT Security Foundation, which we're a member of. Both of those groups have got some advice on how you can secure your devices appropriately. But if you are using third parties to develop these devices, which I'm absolutely sure you probably will be, make sure that you've got appropriate contracts in place so that you're able to audit that, and so that security is applied to those systems and you've got the capability to secure those systems retrospectively. But the bottom line is, test your firmware. Test what you're building. Get it security tested. Don't just chuck it straight out the door, as we see so often. So some of the questions to ask if you are looking at third parties to develop your kit, do you pin SSL on your mobile applications? That one thing will help prevent man-in-the-middle attacks against your mobile application if you're using HTTPS, which you should be. Find out what data the device and the application stores, and what I'd recommend is minimize that. So many of these devices ask for so much personal information just to get it working. The Kettle 2.0 asks for your name, address, your date of birth. Why does a kettle need that just to boil a kettle? Ridiculous. Make sure you sign and you validate your firmware. So if you are, you're responsible for the firmware, make sure that's signed and it's validated at boot. so that it makes it much harder for attackers to be able to create custom firmware or to hack the firmware, as we've done with some of these other devices. And the bottom line is, just think, well, if I steal one of these devices, what can I get from it? And that's the key question to ask your suppliers and your manufacturers. But I guess just to kind of finish off, just one final comment. Whatever happened to a normal kettle?